They found his teeth before they found his name. The rain had been falling for hours, slicking the alley behind Rossi's bar, turning blood into rivers running to the gutter. The city was never more alive than when it tasted fear, and tonight, the streets drank deep. In the amber haze of broken street lamps, the shadows twisted like snakes. Johnny Russo's crew rolled up fast, boots slapping pavement, guns drawn but too late for rescue. Eddie Malone, 28, Irish-American, short dark hair, suit blood-spattered, was kneeling by the body, fists clenched and face wild. He said, "They wanted us to see this." Nobody answered, but the message was clear. This was no random kill. It was a declaration. Gina Moretti, 25, Italian-American, dark curls wet with rain, shoulders trembling, stared at the corpse as if searching for a ghost. She whispered, "He was supposed to be family." Lightning cracked above, exposing the ruin. Fingers broken, eyes wide with terror, a mouth empty of teeth. The city held its breath. Even the sirens came slow, as if the cops knew to wait. Eddie's anger was a silent drumbeat in the downpour. He pressed a card into Gina's palm, only a single word scrawled on it, "Traitor." Fear crawled under everyone's skin. Someone in their house had betrayed them, and that meant all bets were off. Thunder rolled. The turf war began with a corpse no one would bury, and a promise carved in rain and blood. The night would not end clean. The rain didn't let up as dawn approached, painting the city in bruised purples and sickly yellow sodium light. Eddie Malone pressed his fists against the steering wheel, knuckles raw, suit still sticky with blood. The car's wipers thudded back and forth, smearing the city's violence across the windshield. He replayed the night in his head, his friend's ruined face, Gina's hollow stare, the Joker card that meant nothing and everything. In the rear view, Eddie caught sight of Tony Bell, 32, Italian-American, stubble, broad-shouldered, watching him with suspicion. "Whoever did this is close," Tony said, voice rough. Eddie didn't answer. His mind was already racing down side streets of revenge, wondering who in their crew would sell them out for a few dollars or a grudge. Gina shivered in the back seat, hugging herself, rainwater still dripping from her hair. She said, "He was afraid. He said they were coming for him. We should have listened." Eddie turned the car into an empty lot, gravel crunching under tires. He said, "This is just the beginning. If we wait, we're dead." Thunder rolled as the first light crept over the rooftops. The city's heart was beating faster now, and blood would soon follow. Silence followed them out of the car, heavy and damp, as the trio gathered under a flickering street lamp. Eddie's voice was sandpaper, low and shaking. "Somebody handed him over. Somebody in this crew." Tony spat on the ground, anger covering fear. "Nobody gets away with this. Not in my city." Gina's hands shook as she clutched her coat tighter. "His mother is going to want answers. What are we supposed to tell her?" Eddie stared at his own reflection in a rain puddle, seeing a face he barely recognized, haunted, angry, and hungry for payback. He said, "We start with the card. Somebody wanted us to find that body, to know what's coming." The sky above churned with angry clouds promising more storms. The city was waking up, unaware that a war had just been declared. Footsteps echoed from the darkness, making everyone tense. Tony drew his gun, eyes scanning the shadows, while Gina took a step closer to Eddie, searching for reassurance that wouldn't come. A distant siren howled as Eddie led the others into a crumbling warehouse by the docks, rusted doors shrieking open. The air was thick with the stench of oil and old secrets. "Nobody comes here unless they want to disappear," Tony muttered. Shadows stretched across crates and busted windows, the city's heartbeat pounding outside. Eddie lit a cigarette, his hands unsteady. "We wait here. If there's a rat, he'll make a move soon." Gina's eyes scanned the darkness, trying to make sense of shapes that could be friends or ghosts. She said, "You think it was one of us?" Eddie exhaled smoke, his gaze hard. "Trust died tonight. We trust nobody." Thunder rattled the glass. The three of them waited, cold and shivering, surrounded by the memory of violence. The world outside grew brighter, but inside, all was shadow. The storm was only just beginning. The first phone call came as the rain finally let up, a harsh ring slicing through the warehouse gloom. Eddie snatched the phone off the wall, his voice tight. "Yeah." On the other end, a stranger's laugh. "You were already losing, Malone." That was just a taste. Eddie's jaw clenched. "Who is this?" The caller replied. "Ask your friends. Maybe they know." The line went dead. Tony slammed his fist against a crate, frustration and fear boiling over. "They're watching us." Gina flinched, her face ghost pale. Eddie set the receiver down, every muscle coiled. "They want us scared. They want us off balance. We can't let them see us bleed." The city outside had no sympathy for the desperate. Sunlight broke through the clouds, cold and mean, painting the ruined warehouse in harsh relief. The game had started, and no one would escape unscathed. Eddie Malone sat at the kitchen table in his mother's cramped apartment, the same linoleum floor he grew up scraping with toy cars. Morning sunlight filtered through dirty curtains, giving the room a weak, sickly glow. The night's violence clung to him, heavy as a second skin. Gina Moretti stood by the sink, her hair freshly washed but her eyes rimmed red from sleeplessness. She said, "You remember when this place used to feel safe?" Eddie nodded, his voice a hollow whisper. "Safe's just a memory, Gina." Mrs. Malone, 60, Irish-American, gray hair pinned tight, bustled between the stove and fridge, pretending not to notice the dried blood on her son's shirt. She pressed a mug of coffee into Eddie's hand, her fingers trembling. "You boys always bring the storm," she muttered, voice sharp but laced with worry. Tony Bell leaned in the doorway, face drawn, scanning the shadows outside. Eddie said, "It's starting, Ma. I don't know if I can keep you out of it this time." His mother touched his cheek. "You do what you have to. But don't let this city take what's left of your soul." For a moment, Eddie wished he were 10 years old again, running from nothing but curfews. But the city never gave back what it stole. The war was coming home now, whether he was ready or not. Tony Bell led Eddie and Gina down the cracked steps into the old butcher shop, the place where deals used to be made with handshakes, not bullets. The air smelled of cold cuts and old betrayal. Frankie Doyle, 40 male, Irish-American, the crew's fixer, waited by the meat locker, hands hidden in his coat. He said, "Word's out. The Polish are sniffing around, and the Russians want a piece." Eddie's jaw clenched. "It's open season then." Frankie shrugged, eyes darting. "Only if you let it be." Gina leaned against the counter, arms crossed, hiding her fear behind bravado. "We find the traitor before the city eats us alive." Tony shot Frankie a look. "Anyone jump ship?" Frankie shook his head. "No, but everyone's got secrets, even you, Tony." The accusation hung between them. The butcher knives gleamed on the wall, catching the morning light, reminders that trust could be as sharp as it was deadly. Eddie said, "We stay tight, no side deals, we watch each other's backs." The city's hunger rattled the windows. The turf lines were shifting, and loyalty was now a loaded gun. The old church on 6th Avenue still smelled of incense and lost hope. Eddie knelt in a pew, head bowed, fists clenched tight, wrestling with prayers he'd long since abandoned. Gina sat a few rows back, whispering a rosary, lips barely moving, desperate for forgiveness or a sign. Tony stood in the shadows, watching the doors. Father O'Connor, 50, male, Irish-American, black cassock, approached quietly, his eyes gentle but tired. "Eddie, I hear there's trouble." Eddie looked up, voice raw. "There's a rat in my house, Father, somebody I love." Father O'Connor laid a hand on Eddie's shoulder. "You can't clean blood with more blood, son." Eddie almost laughed. "That's the only thing this city understands." Gina turned, her voice trembling. "We can't let them win, not like this." Father O'Connor said, "You still have choices." Tony, impatient, muttered, "We're out of choices, Father." Light streamed through stained glass, painting their faces in fractured color. Each of them, stained by secrets, wondered if redemption was even possible. But outside, The world waited to see who would bleed next. News of the killing spread like wildfire. At a rundown newsstand, old-timers muttered, flipping through blood-spattered headlines. Eddie's picture, young, hard-eyed, stared out beneath block letters. Mob war brewing. Gina watched from across the street, hidden beneath a gray umbrella. She saw whispers become stares, stares become fear. Tony moved through the crowd, shoulders hunched, blending with morning commuters. Word on the street was the crew was falling apart. Someone, somewhere, was selling secrets for a price. Eddie kept his head low, ducking into a greasy diner to meet Sal, a cab driver who knew more than he let on. Sal, 50, male, Italian-American, handed over a scrap of paper. Names, places, they're moving against you, kid. Eddie's face hardened. Why help me, Sal? Sal shrugged. I hate traitors more than I hate cops. Outside, a police car crept by, slow as suspicion. Gina crossed herself and vanished into the crowd. The city wasn't waiting for anyone. If they didn't move first, they'd be dead before sundown. The crew regrouped in a cramped basement beneath an old Italian bakery, the scent of flour and fear thick in the air. Eddie spread Sal's note on the table, names circled in red. This is who's coming for us, and one of them was at Frankie's last night. Gina's voice was barely above a whisper. You think it's one of ours? Tony loaded his pistol, jaw clenched. We don't think, we know. The walls were covered in old photos, reminders of better days, smiling faces now turned suspects. Eddie stared at each name, betrayal burning in his gut. Nobody leaves alone. We move together, or we don't move at all. The basement shook with the rumble of passing trains above, a reminder that the city never stopped, even for grief. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm waiting in the streets. As Tony checked the back door, and Gina watched the window, Eddie made a silent vow. They would not go down easy. The war was about to get personal. By nightfall, the city felt ready to snap. Eddie Malone and his crew moved through the streets in silence, the air thick with fear and rain. They stalked past shuttered storefronts and broken neon signs, eyes scanning every window for a flash of danger. Tony Bell led, pistol tucked in his waistband, nerves wound tight. Gina Moretti walked behind Eddie, one hand in her coat pocket, the other gripping a switchblade. She said, "They're watching us, waiting for a mistake." Eddie nodded, jaw set hard. "Let them watch. I want them to know we're coming." The sidewalks echoed with sirens and distant gunshots, each sound a warning. A black van rolled slowly down the avenue, headlights cutting through steam rising from a manhole. Frankie Doyle called from an alley, waving them over, urgency in his eyes. "Word is the Russians are moving tonight. We have to hit first or we're dead." Gina's breath shuddered. Tony glanced at Eddie. "You sure about this?" Eddie looked past him, voice steel. "We don't get a second chance." The city's heart beat faster, hungry for blood. The lines between hunter and hunted blurred beneath the yellow glare of a single streetlight. The alley behind Santino's Pizza became their war room. Maps spread across trash cans, a tangle of street names and exes marking enemy turf. Owl. Eddie jabbed a finger at a red circle. "They move through here after dark every night. We cut them off. We send a message." Frankie smirked, teeth flashing. "You want a message? Make it loud." Gina stared at the map, her hands trembling. "What if they see us coming?" Eddie met her eyes, voice rough but gentle. "Then we fight our way out." Tony cocked his gun, lips pressed in a thin line. "We only get one shot at this. Screw it up, and we're next." The city sounds filtered in, car horns, laughter, a distant siren. Somewhere a dog barked, lost and angry. Frankie said, "I'll take the fire escape, give me cover." Eddie nodded. "Nobody moves until I say so." They broke, silent and determined, each burdened by a secret fear they couldn't voice. Above them, the sky churned with dark clouds. The storm wasn't done, and neither were they. Gunfire split the silence. The Russians hit hard and fast, shadows pouring from the mouth of the alley, faces hidden beneath hoods. Eddie dove behind a dumpster, bullets chewing brick inches from his head. Tony fired back, shouting, "Stay low!" Gina pressed herself flat, switchblade useless against lead, fear flashing in her eyes. Frankie darted up the fire escape, dropping a Molotov from above. Glass shattered, flames blossomed orange and wild, forcing the attackers back. Eddie yelled, "Now!" They surged forward, Eddie's fist cracking against an enemy jaw, Tony's gun roaring, Gina slashing at a leg that appeared too close. The alley became chaos, smoke, screams, fists, the metallic stench of blood. In 6 seconds, it was over. 3 Russians down, 1 crawling away. Gina leaned against a wall, panting, her hand bloody but alive. Eddie said, "That's the price of betrayal. Anybody else want to try us?" The survivors melted into the city, leaving bodies for the rats. The war had a new chapter, and the crew knew mercy was gone. The aftermath lingered like a bad taste. Sirens screamed in the distance as Eddie and his battered crew slipped into the back of a laundromat, lights flickering overhead. Blood smeared Eddie's knuckles, but he ignored the sting. Tony winced, a bullet having grazed his shoulder. "We need a doctor," Gina said, tearing strips from her shirt to bandage him. Frankie scanned the street through grimy windows. "We made our move. They'll hit back harder." Eddie washed blood from his hands in a cracked porcelain sink, staring at his reflection. He saw a man eroding into something he couldn't name. He muttered, "If we die tonight, at least we die fighting." Gina touched his arm, eyes fierce. "We're not done yet. They want to break us. Let them try." Tony grunted through pain. "Next time we shoot first." The city outside kept spinning, oblivious to the scars being written in its shadows. The crew sat in silence, rage and fear swirling between them, each waiting for the next move. As midnight drew close, Eddie climbed the fire escape to his rooftop, his one place above the chaos. The city sprawled beneath him, soaked in neon, ugly and beautiful at once. Gina joined him, hair loose, eyes red, but determined. "It's not over, Eddie. They'll keep coming." He nodded, voice tired. "They always do." Tony's laughter floated up from the alley, broken but defiant. "We're still here, aren't we?" Frankie leaned on the rail, cigarette glowing, rain flecking his coat. "Tonight we survived. That counts for something." Eddie looked out at the skyline, lights flickering like dying stars. "They wanted to bury us. They forgot we know how to dig." Gina smiled, bittersweet. "What's next?" Eddie didn't answer. The city whispered its secrets, promising more pain. But for now, on this rooftop, under a bruised sky, the crew stood together, battered but unbroken. In the distance, thunder threatened, but their resolve was harder than steel. Thone's shrill ring shattered the tense quiet in the warehouse. Eddie Malone grabbed the receiver, voice tight and cautious. "Who is this?" The reply was cold, a whisper slicing through the static. "It wasn't about the money. He was after me." The words hung heavy like a guillotine's blade. Eddie's grip tightened, knuckles white against the receiver. Gina stood behind him, eyes wide, heart pounding. Tony's jaw clenched, sensing the shift in the battle. This was no longer about turf or cash. Betrayal had come from the deepest shadows. "Who? Tell me," Eddie demanded, but the line went dead. He slammed the phone down, the echo reverberating off the concrete walls. "It's someone we trusted," he said quietly, voice breaking the fragile calm. Gina whispered, "A son, a brother." Tony spat on the floor. "Family's poison. That's the devil you never see coming." Outside, rain began again, washing the blood and lies into the streets. The crew's fragile unity trembled on the edge of collapse. The war had twisted from survival to a hunt for a traitor. Eddie's world shattered further that night at Frankie Doyle's place, a rundown bar where silence screamed louder than words. Frankie, eyes dark with suspicion, slid a faded photo across the scarred wooden table. "Look closely. That's who's been feeding them info. Gina leaned in, heart hammering. The photo showed a young man, mid-20s, sharp-eyed and smiling. Tony's younger brother, Danny Bell. Tony froze, fingers twitching on the table. He's been playing both sides. Eddie's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, a son who sells his family for power. There's no coming back from this. Gina swallowed hard. Why would he do it? Frankie's answer was a grim shrug. Fear, money, or just the thrill. Outside, the bar's neon sign flickered, casting fractured light across broken promises. The crew realized the enemy wasn't just outside. They were bleeding from within. Tony's betrayal hit like a punch to the gut. Eddie confronted him in the abandoned subway tunnel beneath the city, the perfect place to speak in whispers and shadows. Tony's face was hard, eyes dark pools of regret and defiance. I didn't want this, Tony said, voice cracking. Danny's gone too far, but I didn't sell you out. Eddie's gaze was steel. Then prove it, because right now family means nothing if it kills us all. Gina watched from the tunnel's edge, heart split between anger and hope. Above, trains roared past, drowning their words. Tony's hands trembled as he pulled a small envelope from his coat. A list of names and dates, evidence that might save or damn them all. The night pressed close, every breath charged with tension. Eddie said, "This is your last chance." In the shadows, the city waited, ready to swallow whoever faltered first. The next day brought no peace. At a rundown cafe on the edge of their territory, Eddie met with Sal, the cab driver who once whispered secrets through city streets. Sal's voice was low, urgent. Danny's making moves you don't know about. Deals with the Poles and Russians. He's trying to buy his way out. Eddie slammed his fist on the table, eyes blazing. He's a rat then, no loyalty. Gina stirred her coffee, voice quiet but fierce. We have to stop him before it's too late. Sal nodded grimly. Word is he's meeting a buyer tonight at the docks. That's our chance. Eddie's jaw tightened. We end this tonight, or it ends us. Outside, rain began to fall again, turning the city slick and dangerous. The pieces were moving, and Eddie's gamble was all that stood between survival and total ruin. Night fell heavy and thick at the docks, fog rolling off the water like ghostly fingers. Eddie, Gina, Tony, and Frankie crouched behind shipping containers, eyes sharp, guns ready. The air smelled of salt, oil, and betrayal. This is it, Eddie whispered. If Danny shows, we end this. Minutes crawled, every sound amplified, the creak of ropes, distant footsteps. Suddenly, a figure slipped through shadows. Danny Bell, younger, nervous, clutching a briefcase. Eddie stepped forward, voice cold as steel. Game's over, Danny. Danny's eyes darted wildly, desperation clear. You don't understand. I did it to protect us. Gina spat back. Protect? You sold us out. The night erupted in shouts and gunfire, the fragile last threads of family snapping. When silence finally fell, only the sound of dripping water remained, echoing the cost of betrayal. Eddie stood over Danny, face unreadable. This is the devil you didn't see coming. The warehouse smelled of smoke and regret, as Eddie Malone stared down at the smoldering remains of the briefcase. The flames crackled, swallowing the secrets and lies within. Gina stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes sharp and wary. Tony paced near the doorway, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to snap. Frankie leaned against a crate, face unreadable. Eddie's voice broke the silence. We burned the past tonight, but the future is still a war zone. Gina nodded slowly. Danny's gone, but his poison isn't. Tony spat on the floor. Whoever steps into his shoes will get the same treatment. Eddie looked up at the broken ceiling, rain leaking through the cracks. This turf won't be ours without blood. The night was heavy with promises and threats. The crew's resolve hardened. There was no turning back. Victory or ruin was coming, and it would be written in fire. The following morning was heavy with silence and suspicion. Eddie met with Gina at a quiet cafe tucked behind a busy street. Steam rose from their coffee cups, swirling in the cold air. Eddie's voice was low but urgent. The city's eyes are everywhere. We can't trust anyone outside this circle. Gina's gaze sharpened. Even inside, the cracks are deep. Tony's name lingered like a shadow between them. We need to rebuild, but smarter, cleaner. Gina's fingers tapped the table. And more ruthless. Eddie nodded slowly, feeling the weight of command pressing down. This isn't just about survival anymore, it's about control. Outside, the hum of traffic and distant sirens reminded them that life went on. But their lives were broken, stitched together with fear and ambition. Every move was calculated. Every silence, a threat. Back in their hideout, Frankie Doyle paced in front of a wall covered with newspaper clippings, photos, and notes pinned in chaotic order. He said, "The cops are sniffing around more than usual. We have to stay ahead." Eddie studied the map spread across the table, tracing rival territories with a finger. "We hit them where it hurts. Quick, brutal strikes, no mercy." Gina pulled out a revolver, checking the cylinder with practiced hands. And no mistakes. Tony joined them, shoulders still stiff, voice steady. "It's not just about revenge anymore. It's survival." The crew's faces were drawn and tired, shadows deep under eyes. Every plan was a gamble. Every alliance fragile. Outside, the city throbbed with danger and opportunity, a brutal game played in whispers and gunfire. Eddie swallowed hard. "We don't just want peace, we want power." The cold truth settled. This war would only end when one side was wiped clean. Nightfall brought no rest. The crew gathered on a rooftop, overlooking the city's flickering lights. Eddie lit a cigarette, smoke curling in the cool air. Gina leaned close, voice low. "We're marked now. Everyone's watching." Tony's gaze swept the skyline, calculating risks. "They want us broken." Frankie exhaled. "Then let's show them what broken looks like." Eddie's eyes burned with cold fire. "This turf is ours. We take it back, piece by piece." The city breathed around them, alive, dangerous, unpredictable. Each shadow could hide an enemy or an ally. The stakes had never been higher. In the distance, sirens wailed, a reminder that the war outside was only growing louder. They stood united but frayed, a family forged in fire and betrayal. Eddie whispered, "No more running, no more hiding." Tonight, the battle for control would take a brutal new turn. The next morning, the streets were quiet, but charged with anticipation. Eddie walked alone through the neighborhood, eyes scanning every corner. Memories of friends lost and promises broken weighed on him. Gina caught up, voice steady. "It's not over, Eddie. We've stirred the hornet's nest." He stopped, looking out over the cityscape. "Good. Let them come." Tony and Frankie appeared behind them, silent but ready. Eddie's jaw tightened. "We're the hunters now." Gina smiled grimly. "And we're hungry." The city watched, waiting for the next move. The war was no longer just survival, it was a reckoning. And Eddie Malone was ready to write the final chapter with blood. The night was a cage of shadows, as Eddie Malone paced the rooftop of an abandoned factory, the city's neon glow flickering like distant stars. Gina joined him silently, her eyes sharp, cutting through the darkness. "They're coming for us harder now," she said quietly. Eddie's jaw tightened. "We've burned bridges and made enemies. There's no turning back." Tony appeared, rubbing a fresh bruise on his cheek. "Every step we take is watched, every word a trap." Frankie lit a cigarette, smoke curling in the cold air. "We fight smarter or we die." Eddie looked over the cityscape, voice low but fierce. "Tonight, we don't just survive, we hit back." The storm clouds gathered above, promising violence. Their lives were a high-stakes gamble. One mistake meant everything burned. The city waited, breath held, for the reckoning to begin. Inside a cramped safe house, the crew gathered around a battered table littered with guns and maps. Eddie traced a route with a trembling finger, voice low. "This is where they'll hit us, fast and brutal." Gina nodded, checking her revolver's cylinder again. We have to be ready before they make their move. Tony's eyes were dark pools of anger and exhaustion. If we fall, everything we fought for dies. Frankie slammed his fist on the table. Then we fight with everything we've got. The tension thickened like smoke, wrapping around them. Outside, the city's pulse quickened. Sirens, footsteps, distant shouts, a soundtrack of impending chaos. Eddie met each gaze, voice hard. Tonight, we take the fight to them, no regrets. The crew's breath synchronized, a silent vow passing between them. The battle for survival had entered its deadliest phase. Gunfire shattered the night as Eddie's crew met the enemy head-on in the dead end of an industrial park. Shadows exploded with flashes of gunfire and shouts. Eddie dove behind a rusted dumpster, bullets thudding nearby. Gina returned fire, face grim and focused. Tony grunted, shoulder bleeding, but kept moving. Frankie lobbed a smoke grenade, blinding their attackers for a moment. The chaos was brutal, metal scraping, feet pounding, voices breaking. Eddie's heart pounded with adrenaline and rage. We don't stop until they do. Every breath was a fight for survival. When the smoke cleared, the enemy retreated, leaving a trail of broken bodies. Gina lowered her weapon, sweat and blood mixing on her brow. Eddie breathed hard, voice hoarse. We're not just surviving, we're winning. The city's heartbeat slowed but never stopped, waiting for the next storm. The aftermath was a haze of pain and determination. Eddie cleaned the blood from a shallow cut on his cheek, voice quiet but firm. They'll be back, harder. Gina sat nearby, loading bullets with calm precision. So will we. Tony leaned heavily against the wall, breathing ragged but eyes sharp. We've changed. No one's coming to save us. Frankie shook his head, voice bitter. This city chews people up and spits them out. We're just trying to hold on. The room was thick with unspoken fears and stubborn hope. Eddie looked around, voice low. We don't get to be heroes, just survivors. Gina met his gaze, nodding. Survivors who fight. Outside, rain began again, tapping the windows. A lullaby for a war still raging. Their wounds were deep, but their resolve was deeper. The night was long, and the fight far from over. At dawn, Eddie stood alone on the rooftop, overlooking the city's awakening. The skyline was bruised by smoke and broken promises. He lit a cigarette, the flame flickering in the cold morning air. Gina joined him quietly, wrapping a coat tighter around her shoulders. This war has no end, she said softly. Eddie exhaled smoke, eyes scanning the horizon. Maybe, but we decide how it's fought. Tony and Frankie appeared behind them, tired but unbroken. Eddie's voice was steady. We fight for what's ours, no matter the cost. The city stirred beneath them, indifferent and relentless. They were ghosts walking the edges of light and shadow, bound by loyalty and blood. The storm had passed, for now. But the war was far from over. The funeral was a bitter spectacle under a leaden sky, the rain falling like morning tears. Eddie Malone stood alone at the edge of the cemetery, the cold biting through his coat. He wore the same suit he'd buried his father in years ago, stiff, somber, a suit soaked in blood and regret. Gina approached quietly, her face pale but resolute. This is the reckoning, she said softly. Eddie nodded, eyes fixed on the fresh mound of earth. Every betrayal, every loss, it's all here. Tony and Frankie stood further back, shadows against the gray sky, faces carved with exhaustion. The crowd whispered and stared, but Eddie felt nothing but the heavy silence inside. He thought of the streets, the broken promises, and the family that was never whole. A distant thunder rolled. He whispered, "This isn't the end. It's the price we pay." The city waited, unforgiving, as the rain erased footprints and promises alike. Later, in a dimly lit back room of a downtown bar, the crew gathered for one last conversation. The air was thick with smoke and unspoken truths. Eddie's voice was steady but hollow. We got what we wanted, or maybe what we deserved. Gina's eyes flickered with pain. The city's scars run deep. We'll carry them forever. Tony lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating tired lines on his face. There's no retirement plan for ghosts. Frankie nodded, voice rough. We made peace with the war, but it never made peace with us. Silence settled over them, heavy and final. Outside, the rain pattered against the windows, a cold reminder that life moved on, indifferent and relentless. They were survivors now, changed beyond recognition, bound by blood, loss, and the stories they'd never tell. Outside the bar, Gina stood beneath a flickering street lamp. Rain finally ceased, but the cold remained. She lit a cigarette, the smoke curling in the still night air. Memories of all they had lost danced behind her eyes. Friends, family, innocence. Her voice was barely a whisper. We fought to live, but we died inside. A shadow approached. Die, silent and watchful. He said, "The city doesn't forget. Neither do we." Gina exhaled slowly. No matter what happens, this bloodline runs deep. Eddie looked toward the distant skyline, voice low. And it's not finished yet. The street lamp flickered again before steadying. The night was quiet but charged, a fragile peace wrapped in fragile lives. Somewhere, a dog howled, a call from the past echoing into the future. The dawn broke over the city, pale light spilling across rooftops stained with smoke and sorrow. Eddie stood at his apartment window, looking out over the streets that had shaped and shattered him. His reflection was ghost-like in the glass, haunted, weary, but unyielding. Gina entered quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We did what we had to." Eddie nodded slowly. "But it cost us everything." Silence wrapped around them, a fragile cocoon before the chaos of the day. The war had ended, but its echoes would ripple forever. Eddie's voice was soft but certain. "We're not the same people who started this, and we never will be." Outside, the city woke unaware, a giant breathing, indifferent. Inside, two souls carried the weight of a bloody legacy, one that would never fade. As the sun climbed higher, Eddie walked the streets alone, the city alive around him but distant, as if he moved through a dream. His footsteps echoed softly against cracked sidewalks, memories chasing him with every step. He paused at a graffiti-covered wall, words scrawled in defiance and despair. He whispered to himself, "There's no retirement plan for ghosts." The streets hummed with life, oblivious to the blood spilled beneath. Eddie looked up at the sky, rain clouds breaking apart. The future was uncertain, the past unshakable. But in that moment, amidst ruins and shadows, he carried a quiet truth. Survival was not surrender, and some wars never truly end.